Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. Are we there yet? The State of Cloud Native Application Security, brought to you by Snyk with Trend Micro and Dynatrace. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get into our amazing discussion today, I need to go over a few housekeeping items with you. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, or you just want to go back and watch it again, you'll be able to do so. We will send an email with instructions for how to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit us at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and it will also be there for you. We are taking questions from the audience throughout today's presentation, so go ahead and use the Q&A tab on your webinar console to submit your questions for our speakers. We'll try and get to as many as possible at the end. And stick around till the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So make sure you stick around and see if you are a winner. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. Joining me are Simon Maple, Field CTO at Snyk, Ian Heritage, Cybersecurity Architect at Trend Micro, and Jack Marcel, Director of Product Marketing at Dynatrace. Welcome, all of you. I'm going to put myself on mute and turn my camera off and let you get right into the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Sharon, for that intro. And let's jump into talk a little bit about who we have on the panel today. So why don't I start? My name's Simon Maple, as Sharon mentioned. I've been at Snyk now a few years. Snyk is a very developer-friendly, focused tooling for developers who want to develop securely. And we provide tooling to help developers find and fix vulnerabilities in their cloud-native applications. Joining me, as Sharon said, Ian Heritage from Trend Micro. Ian, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Trend and also what Trend does?
Yeah, sure. And Simon, first of all, thanks for having us. So I'm Ian Heritage, one of the cybersecurity architects. I guess my day-to-day is helping cloud builders build securely in the cloud. We focus on a platform called Cloud One, which luckily incorporates Snyk tooling as well. So really excited to see the sort of relationship grow there. And yeah, really focusing on securely developing that customer journey, being able to securely ship their code and build security into their products and yeah, secure their customers at the end of the day. So yeah, that's awesome. A bit about me.
Welcome. And it sounds like you're from the UK as well. A nice rainy, wet UK as it is right now.
Yeah. I'm from just outside London, so Oxford. So yeah.
Oh, awesome. Not too far from me then. And joining us today, welcome Ian. Joining us today, and I'm doing it in the order of the videos, but I just realized it's slightly different on the slides. Jack Marcel from Dynatrace. Jack, how are you?
Hey, fine, thank you, Simon. I'm coming from California, where it's just getting light right now. I work for Dynatrace. Dynatrace is well known as a leader in the market for application performance monitoring. But last year, we jumped into the security space. We're taking the same platform that we built to manage applications, to monitor their performance, and leveraging that also now for security. And like Trend Micro, we have baked Snyk into our platform. It provides the vulnerability database that we leverage, and remediation helps. So that's what Dynatrace does.
Awesome. Well, welcome to both of you. We're going to be going through some of the responses and results from a recent survey that Snyk ran, and we're going to talk through them. So I'll cover some of the major talking points in some various sections of that report. But first of all, why don't we jump into the actual survey first? And a big caveat, of course, this is a survey, and this isn't a survey run across billions of people. This is a survey with around 600 survey responses. So like every survey, like every data gathering mechanism, there will be certain biases in there. We tried our best to eliminate as many of those as we could by sharing this as widely and as broadly as we could with our partners, across social media, across community lists and so forth, to really try and get as broad a set of answers as we could, which will represent the community as best we could. There are around 30 questions that launched over around 6 to 8 weeks. And we analyzed this just briefly a short time ago, should I say, around a month and a half ago. and produced a report which provides a number of different takeaways. Now, the respondents were largely actually more on the enterprise side of things here, as we can see. And yeah, about half enterprise and the rest made up of mid to small startups. In terms of roles, you're looking at quite a broad spectrum with developers, security, and DevOps, as you can see there. No real huge dominance, which is great because we get a massive split across. Now, there's a number of other responses here from product managers, from exec teams, and a whole bunch of other personas as well. Now, geo-wise, we were about similar in terms of EMEA and the US. We were around a third each, with the US, of course, being one country there. You can see it's a 34% take, whereas in the UK, that's split across many different countries there as well. So this is some data about the demographics of the report. Now, let's jump into 4 sections. This is going to be the first one around how well adopted cloud native technologies are. So the big takeaways here, we can see that, we will see that container and serverless adoption is mature and across many different types and sizes of orgs. Infrastructure as code is being well adopted with cloud native deployments and well used among them. And then thirdly, security isn't the reason why people adopt cloud native technologies, but it's very important to their strategy. So we'll cover those 3 points in just a second, but let's jump directly into the data. So we can see here that we asked one of the questions, because rather than just say, do you use containers, do you use serverless, and we don't really get much of an understanding of how deep people are using it, we asked what percentage of your production environments are using cloud native technology. So here you can see almost 60% of people using containers, and 21% of people using serverless, and around 50% of people deploying, or sorry, 50% of production applications being deployed using IEC technologies as well. So yeah, we can see good adoption here, mature adoption. And one of the interesting things here as well is when we split between enterprises, medium size, and startups, you can actually see adoption right across the board there. It's not just on startups or small companies, it's adoption all the way through to enterprise companies, which is great. Now, when we think about why people are moving into containers, we were interested just as a security company as to how big that security push would be, but we weren't expecting it to be, significant in terms of a reason why people will move across to a cloud native technology. And we can see almost 70% care about deployment velocity, the ease of management of pushing releases through into a cloud native deployment as well. 2/3 of people there. Security, just over a third. But like I say, it's not necessarily a reason that you would expect people to have such a large lift and shift from one architecture to another. That doesn't mean it's not important to people, though. We can see here 99% of companies recognize security as important to their strategy, with 83% saying very, very, very important. So yeah, I'll kind of open this a little bit broadly now to the wider panel here. How does this hit you, this information? Anything surprise you here?
Yeah, Simon, I'd just like to touch on the reasons for moving to apps and containers. I think that improving of security outcomes, the deployment velocity is a great benefit of moving to containers, right? Like the adoption that you can benefit from there. I think the improved security is actually a net impact or net result of having improved security. I think traditionally we've been at the stage where we've been baking in security after the event because we forgot to put security in, right? Or we are not in a pattern where security can be changed. So the very nature of how applications are now developed with microservices, that very much, fast nature, businesses need to develop at lightning speed. We can look at incorporating patterns within it. And I think this is one of although people don't realize it, security is just a net benefit of having a microservice platform. And making sure that we're building in. Obviously, we all know this, but I think this is a really positive recognition that, people are moving. And I'd love to see that in the future, that improvement in security go up as the realization is an outcome of moving to containers and microservice architectures, right?
No, absolutely. I think, I think containers, and we'll talk a little bit about concerns and things like that in a short time. But I think when people move to containers, yes, there are going to be some additional aspects of security that could be concerning or could be problematic for people. But overall, there are some really strong areas of this kind of architecture which really does help with security. So I think from both sides, the overall architecture of a container or cloud native environment that helps you react to situations of security, as well as just that fast-paced development, really requires a change of how people think about securely developing their code. Jack, I'd love to come to you and ask the question. I guess we've jumped in a little bit in terms of assuming everyone recognizes what cloud native means. Yeah, I'd love to kind of hear your interpretation of what cloud native means to you.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Immediately, people might say, "Oh, that must mean public cloud." But it turns out that Dynatrace, because of our observability platform, we have the ability to see across all of our enterprise customers what the applications look like and where they're deployed. And it turns out we know that about 1/3 of cloud native applications running in containers, running in Kubernetes, are actually deployed on-premise in private clouds. And then another third or so use hybrid clouds. Their applications actually span both public and private clouds. And this actually has a big implication for security. The implication is it's important to use security products that work across all your environments where you might have deployed containers. And that might sound like an easy problem to solve, but actually, we've done some research ourselves, and one of actually the top concern that enterprises told us is that they have too many environment-specific cybersecurity controls. In other words, they might have a control that works in AWS, but nowhere else, or maybe a control that works in their private cloud, but nowhere else. And that puts the security team in a position that makes it difficult to enforce standard security policy across all environments. And it creates extra work because now security people have to piece together information from this tool with this tool, which often is really difficult to do. So that's my little color that I'm adding to the cloud native slide you had there.
Yeah, and I think also what we hear a lot is, particularly in and around various tools around security, is that consolidation is really, really important. If not for being a cost reason or anything of that business nature, just from the usability and the experience that developers can kind of have by using similar things across different spaces. So to reduce the different specific tools or specific differences between environments can be very, very useful from that developer adoption or developer experience point of view. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump forward and talk about our next section, which is really about, we're getting to the meat of security on cloud native technologies, and this is around the incidents and concerns. So a few takeaways here that we'll cover in the data in just a second, but the misconfigurations and known vulnerabilities are really the areas of concerns and areas of incidents as well. So this was shown throughout the data very, very strongly, and I think this is an important, and for us personally as Snyk, that was great because a lot of our platform looks upon those areas. But let's jump directly into the concerns, because this is an important area. And of course, concerns doesn't always relate to incidents and doesn't necessarily mean you are weaker there from a technology point of view. It could be anything down from education to the teams literally just not having that experience in these new technologies. So we asked the question around, are you more concerned, less concerned, or around the same since moving into a cloud native space? And you can see here that organizations are around 4x, almost 4x, more likely to have an increased concern than a decreased concern. And yeah, like I say, this is an interesting one. I'd love to kind of ask the audience here to see, if this is if some of these stats as well are representative of you and your organizations that moving to these, projects that are cloud native, or projects that, compared to projects that aren't cloud native, is there greater unknowns, greater concern in and around those projects from a security point of view? So this was an interesting one here, and we break this down a little bit further now. And think about where the types of issues exist that provide this concern, and you can see here that there's significant concerns around misconfiguration, insecure APIs, known unpatched vulnerabilities, secret leaks as well, and this is split between how the amount of adoption that you would have in a cloud native environment. So the question about what percentage of your production environments use cloud native technology, we took the upper quartile there and the lower quartile, and we called those high adopters and low adopters. And so this is the differences in concerns. Around those. Actually, rather than wait till the end of this section, Ian, I'd love to bring you in here, because I think Trend Micro also have a lot of data in this space, and you're very, very strong in with the security background. So I'd love to hear how your research either backs this or contradicts it. It would be great to have your input here.
Yeah, no, it definitely backs it. So Trend Micro Research have done specific research into cloud and container adoption and things like that. And I would say that cyber criminals are capitalizing on misconfigurations these days. I would say that, ransomware, crypto mining, e-skimming, where they're embedding into your applications and harvesting off your credit card details inside those applications that are there. Definitely support this approach. We put in honeypots. We take in data from our feedback in terms of threat intelligence. And I guess the misconfiguration for me, is a worry, because sometimes it can be seen as a people problem, but I would say that, processes and technology can be put in place to put in protective bubbles around that. And I think with anything misconfiguration, it is all about visibility, and it comes back to, are you observing what's going on in your environments? And I think you'll safely say these areas of concern, there are so many, and some of them are interlinked. The misconfiguration of a Kubernetes cluster could be the event of an insecure API. We've seen events come in where someone gains access, and then they're specifically looking for a Kubernetes cluster to see if they can go against those insecure APIs, right? So I think it's the observability around those misconfigurations is something, the whole security community is all about benefiting. And yeah, like you said, there's Trend Micro Research out there, and we can signpost you to that as well. That give that in more granular detail as well. But yeah, definitely agree with the with the stats here. Worryingly agree.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one as well, right? Because this is concern, and I think the threat hasn't changed necessarily. The threat is the question of how these threats are made open or accessible to attackers. Yes, well, now we're doing it through misconfiguration. Now we're doing it through configuration or lack thereof, or issues in your configuration. It's potentially being done by different people who have significantly different backgrounds to the typical ops folks in previous style deployments. So the threat hasn't changed necessarily here. It's just the way it exposes itself through a different configuration as well, right? Which is very, very very interesting to me as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's jump on now to let's see whether these concerns are actually well placed. And when we think about that, we want to know, are our incidents happening in the same place as where we are putting our most effort and most concern? And you can see here, straight away, misconfigurations, known unpatched vulnerabilities, significantly higher, and also specifically if you compare it with the high adopters there as well, significantly higher for those. Although that's not to say it's completely eliminated by low adopters, of course. Still the highest areas of incidents. When you look at this data as well, please do see on the right hand side, almost 1 in 5, around 1 in 5 have declined to answer this question. So these numbers are a representation of 80% of the audience here which submitted their answers. Couple of interesting things I find. High adopters have a greater chance of a failed audit, could be correlated to levels of automation and levels of abstraction, not kind of like seeing what's happening under the covers as much. Data leaks by insider as well being significantly greater. So I'd like to talk about the correlation in terms of what we're looking at here around adoption of cloud native, security concerns, or incidents. Jack, I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, very interesting results you have here, and I think that there's two ways to explain these results. The first is that the pace of application security has increased markedly, but the pace of security tooling has not increased as much. Many security tools are still not automated, and for this reason, many developers actually avoid using security tools because they are afraid that it will cause them to miss a deadline. They've actually told us this in the survey that Dynatrace published back in March. And it's not just that they're not using the security tools, they're actually avoiding security people. 27% of respondents in the survey that we published back in March said that they actually avoid security people, avoid letting them into their team meetings because of fear of those darn security tools slowing us down. And that would explain perhaps the finding that you have there, that the more highly adopted the organization is around cloud native applications, the more they're seeing these security problems crop up. Mm-hmm. Second potential reason that causes these results is the fact that cloud native applications very commonly use open source software. In fact, I saw a statistic published by Forrester just last month. They said that the average application now consists of 70% open source components, which is about double what it was 5 years ago. And the problem is that open source software is full of vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities are being exploited. So it's likely that your respondents know about all this, and that's another reason why they're reporting increased security concerns, especially those high adopters.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting, and I think, yeah, when we look at, so I'd love to touch on two of those things that you mentioned. First of all, I think, the fact that developers aren't doing as much security because they want to almost like push back for speed reasons. This is something which I think is very much rings true, particularly with more traditional teams where the security team is almost like seen as a blocker rather than an enabler. And I think this is absolutely what needs to be pushed back on, in terms of, we can't just push security measures into a development flow and say, right, you have to deal with it now. It's all about how can we enable and prepare developers to develop securely, and have the security team, rather than push back and block the security team should be there ready to say, how can I speed you up? How can I help you do what you need to do to develop securely? And I think that's a really interesting observation, and I think it's very, very accurate. So yeah, absolutely. The second thing is, I think, I had a really interesting chat with someone. It was I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the secure developer, and it was a very interesting one where someone said they went to one of their development teams and they gave them 30,000 issues from their SaaS tooling, and it was the quickest way that they could never talk to that developer ever again, right? Because it's about, you need to give that developer something that is reasonable, that they understand, and that is actually a high enough risk that they need to think about. So when we think about, for example, open source, and I think the stat you mentioned, I'm surprised it's actually not higher than 70%. But when you come back and you say, yeah, you've got these hundreds of thousands vulnerabilities across your organization, you need to think, right, what actually affects me? What can I fix? How can I fix it? And really go through and triage from that point of view. So I think it's almost like doing it from understanding the greatest pain. And I think that is also kind of can what slow developers significantly as well. There was one question actually that I think is a good time to take in from Magno. I see on the Q&A, which was around the what do we need then to fix these? Is it tools? Is it education? Anyone want to take that one?
I would say there's a mixture, right? I think it's that people, process, technology, it all comes in mind, and without the cliche buzzword. But I would say the visibility across this, you can just see here in the incidents, right? I'm really pleased that we see such high rates in the misconfiguration, that you've even identified that you've got a misconfiguration is a key one to even identifying an incident. The visibility for me is once you've identified it, it's bringing that across the teams. Whether you've got security and developers, it shouldn't be, a middle ground. It should be, how can you share that information across the teams? Because effectively for a business outcome, you need those teams to be working together, not against each other. Because like you say, if you go in ahead, and it's like a typical pen test that used to be in the day, like I've got 5,000, pieces of actions that you need to go and action. But if 10 of those are, really actionable, then you can go and crack them. Then those are the ones that you want to surface. So I would say, for me, it always comes down to visibility, and then you can lead on. If you can see it, then you can action it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the culture change is a really important piece. Working with the security team better, whether through a security champion program or some mechanism in which security can get involved earlier and be seen as empowerers to developers. But I think developers more and more need to own this in terms of visibility. Exactly what you say, visibility, extremely important to understand where these issues are. Then support from other teams, security teams and others, to help understand what can be fixed, what are the greatest risks, and then being supported in terms of fixing this. So I think, obviously tooling and things like that will help, but it's only part of the puzzle. You need everything else there for that tooling to actually be best used. Okay, so why don't we jump forward and let's go into automation. Now, we saw a really strong correlation between those who are the higher adopters of cloud native deployments and technologies, and the levels of automation which people had in order to deploy their applications to production. So we can see here some really strong takeaways that people who are more automated, they had more security tools, more security processes throughout the SDLC, not even at just any one point. But more interestingly, this was actually earlier in the developer adoption, the developer phase of that. And of course, the biggest takeaway that we wanted is not just the visibility, while that is super important, fixing, actually actionably taking steps to mitigate these risks. So let's jump into these findings, and we can see straight away. First question we asked is, how automated is your deployment pipelines? And while the vast majority, 95% of people are automated to some extent, only a third are automated entirely. So a no touch, very, very low touch, I would expect people would say they're entirely automated. Now that's good because, we're talking with a lot of people who have very different stages of their applications, many years old, very early stage applications as well. So that's a reasonable stat. When we look at how the correlations between that and some other things, let's talk about when people do security testing. And you can see here, there's people who are entirely automated. You would expect them to have greater touches, things like CI in particular, those kind of areas where you'd expect more testing to be. What really shocks me here on this slide is the local development, because there's a lot here you can't automate. You can't force developers to test in either IDEs or on the CLI. But this shows a real strong correlation between testing in the pipeline encourages developers to make testing a part of their manual steps, their local development. So I'd love to jump across to Jack here, who obviously Dynatrace sitting kind of like more on the right hand side, coming right across to the left of developers, and from our point of view, from Snyk, starting on the left and going right. Shift left is a phrase which is very overused in my opinion, but it's a good one in that people recognize it and understand what it means. But are we genuinely talking about shifting process left, or is it more of an expansion to the left?
Yeah, great research you have here. Certainly shift left has been occurring for the last few years, and a lot of good has come from it. It allows developers to identify vulnerabilities quicker, and that makes it cheaper and faster to remediate those vulnerabilities. But if you look at the right part of your slide in production, it looks like that has almost been ignored. And DevSecOps is really about culture and also about infusing security at all steps of the software development lifecycle. And we are seeing a lot of customer interest in shift right. Mm-hmm. Some research that we published in March indicated that 44% of respondents were planning to increase their shift right security by deploying runtime protection controls. Why is shift right important? Well, that's where all the attacks happen, right? That's where the application is actually connected to the internet. And what if you have some applications that are deployed, but actually they didn't run through the software development pipeline that you so nicely instrumented? What if you purchased the application from a third party? They did the development and now you're running it. If you don't have anything over on the right to show you that there are vulnerabilities there, that attacks are happening there, then you're really blind to that. And of course, security people don't like to be blind about anything.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's a real concern, and I think overall when we talk about shift left or indeed shift right, I think we don't want to ignore what's happening from where we're shifting from as well, right? It's a case of the winners here have complete visibility across from left to right. So it's not about, shifting left doesn't mean ignore the right, shifting right doesn't mean ignore the left. The best scenario is to have these practices across the entire pipeline, which is really important. And I love the production data that we can use, particularly where the Untrace uses Snyk as well, in order to look at the vulnerabilities and actually see what is actually being attacked here in production, and let's prioritize those. And I think that's a really important thing to, rather than to show a developer all of these list of vulnerabilities that need to be fixed, these are the ones that are happening in production. So pulling that production data, to a developer and saying, this is what needs to be prioritized first, that's a really powerful message and a powerful combination for sure.
Agree.
So on the next slide, we then cover about how often people do their security testing. And now this is superb from a visibility point of view in terms of recognizing that tests are happening, recognizing where we have issues. And these are, numbers that are so significant that it's really clear how much visibility you can have with that automation, whether that's through monitoring, through pipeline testing, etc. Really, really important. The slide which I think to jump on, which we have real value from, is how quick can we react to an issue. And I think this is what really mitigates issues, reduces risk. And what we can see here is this correlation between respondents who test, respondents who are automated, and those respondents who can fix in a short period of time, like a day or less. This is significant. Almost 3/4 of people can fix critical issues within a week or less. Only around less than a third for those who are not automated. This is important. Ian, I know you've got a take on this slide as well.
Yeah, no, I think that the clear benefit of building in that automation is key here. I think we've been speaking a lot to the security operations team, how they can get visibility earlier on into that pipeline. And you've said it, Simon, like the ability to embed tools at every stage is definitely key. But also bringing that together, once we can embed, Trend Micro tools can be embedded into the production, actually from the developer. So the developer can insert a code library and it can run as a defensive mechanism to the runtime. But if something is then detected, it can then be instantiated as the feedback loop in that automation process. So whether it signals another process to go and rebuild, or we've identified that someone's hammering a particular CVE against your application, then that's the key thing there. And I would also say, you know, that the part on the actual timeline of vulnerabilities being identified is absolutely key. If we go back to more of a traditional security sort of process around Cyber Essentials in the UK, they say you should patch within 14 days. You know, as long as we can keep that down, then the benefit's there. Now, traditionally, that's all been instantiated as, you know, you put another, you deploy a patch the way you would. But we know in these environments, you can't just deploy a patch to a container, right? You have to shift left to that developer to instantiate a new process there. So I think that visibility across it all, but building in the automation so you don't have to get bogged down with it, is not, you know, it goes back to your positive results earlier, right? Like building it in early is just the key here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think this shows two things. One is the nimble speed at which you can react to a critical security issue. But I think what you're really saying there as well, as, or should I say, what you're also saying there is, if you look at the golden path of someone actually just trying to deliver software, the ability to push that security practices into the development process means you won't be, there's a reduced chance of you being blocked. You can actually, you are more autonomous as a team in order to be able to write software and produce software without necessarily it being slowed down by multiple checks, etc. So it's interesting, on another podcast I heard about how DevSecOps is there to speed things up rather than slow it down, because you know, whatever the processes we use are, whether it's DevSecOps or something else, security standards still need to be met. So you can either choose this DevSecOps practice that will speed that up for you, or you can choose the more traditional method of, you know, more audits, etc., and it will just block you and it will halt your progress a lot faster.
Yeah, definitely.
So actually an interesting question coming in before we move on from Reza, or more a comment saying open source software vulnerabilities are not higher than COTS, the commercial off-the-shelf products. The reason we know about open source vulnerabilities because of its nature of being open. The remediation of vulnerabilities also happens faster because they're noticed sooner, and community provides the patches. And I think there's a couple of things there which are interesting for me. First of all, yeah, you know, a vulnerability is a vulnerability. If it's a remote code execution in open source, your custom code, your a commercial product, you know, it's just as bad wherever it is. I think there are certain things which can exacerbate the speed of an attack. An open source product, for example, or a commercial product, I suppose, but an open source product, I would say, is going to be more widely used. Perhaps, you know, if you look at something like struts, the number of people that are using struts and things like that, the attack surface across the web could potentially be higher through that. I think. Yeah, it's absolutely. I would agree with the fact that, you know, a vulnerability shouldn't be considered higher than another vulnerability because it's open source. But with the number of not just patches but exploits that are made available on the exploits DB, etc., on open source components, you get a lot more people jump on. In my experience, from maybe more anecdotal, but when you see a vulnerability, you see an exploit being created, that becomes available, and lots of people jump onto that straight away. So I think that there's a lot of commonality. I think the open source world probably moves a little bit faster, both in terms of find and fix on those issues as well. One of the greatest concerns for me in that space is not so much necessarily how fast the patches are made available, though. It's the consumption of applications, whether it's a COTS off the shelf or whether it's an open source tool. Open source library, how fast can a user or an application maintainer consume those updates, which has always been the biggest problem.
Yeah, and Simon, just to interrupt there, I think, you know, with Trend Micro owning the Zero Day Initiative that looks at COTS applications, right?
Yes.
Like we're one of the biggest disclosures of Microsoft vulnerabilities, for example. this is one of the key reasons why we've teamed up with Snyk to get that open source intelligence, right? In terms of understanding the open source vulnerabilities. And I think the key thing there is that the adoption of open source has expedited because of cloud native technologies which leverage open source, right? So I think we saw it with Mac and Windows traditionally, right? Like the attacker would go after the more dominant operating system that was being used in production. And now more dominant operating systems are being used in production. The net effect, if I can exploit a vulnerability on an open source or a COTS, then the net income is that the attacker, unfortunately, is going to, take hold of the victim and exfiltrate whatever they want. So yeah, really, I completely agree. They're not one of the same, but they should be measured, and you should have the level of depth and reliability to understand those types of vulnerabilities in your environment. So it comes back to visibility again of that.
Awesome. So great questions, great comments. Keep them coming in. And now let's go to a slightly contentious topic in and around ownership. So who should own security? Who should be more responsible for security? Should one person be more responsible, or should it be a joint responsibility across teams? Love to hear your comments and chat here as to your opinion. So here are some takeaways from the data which we saw. It is that developers do want to own security, but the security teams are slower at giving it away than developers are at taking it. Developers do show care for security as well, just as much as the security team. So let's dig into the data a little bit. So now on the responsibility question, we asked who should be responsible, and what we love the idea of a little bit of a contentious question here. We appreciate that there are lots of people that could be responsible, and perhaps lots of people that should have a shared ownership of this. But we asked who is primarily responsible for the security of your cloud native application, just to understand where people are thinking it should mostly sit, who should mostly be responsible. So developers here, we split up between developer responses and security responses based on the role that they said they should that they're doing in their organizations. And you can see very interestingly here the differences between the answers from developers, the differences in the responses that answer developers. So developers are responding to say that 37% of developers, 37% of respondents say that developers should own security. On the security side, only 10% of security folks think that developers are primarily responsible for that. So very, very interesting. On the converse, you see the security responses more leaning heavily into the IT security team and the application security team. So really, really, a strong preference to their own teams. And I think this is very interesting to see, from the different camps, almost, not that we want to be different camps or different silos, but who should really be pushing for that security. What do you folks think on the call? Is there who would it lean most to from a responsibility point of view, do you think?
So I can go on this. I think it doesn't have to be one team's responsibility is the key thing. I think we all agree with that. But I think this is a really positive result that developers actually want to take part in security. And because we've always seen that security operations or security teams specifically focused on the security side have said that developers don't care. They just want to ship things and they just want to ditch the responsibility. But I would say that, giving them tools that they are comfortable with, that developers are going to love that because they're going to feel embedded into the process, embedded to getting their applications out, because they know once they get a no from security, it can delay things. And this is why, I actually think security operations CISO should actually embrace this type of survey to say that actually, how can we empower you as the developer? I'm a great advocate, and you mentioned it earlier, Simon, of the security champion. This could be an individual who's taken in, an interest into the security world and wants to be embedded into that developer platform. I've spoken to teams where they're looking at doing gamification, so like leaderboards of certain developers who are, scoring higher in their code, which can sometimes see as a bit of a battle, but we know that developers love that gamification Discord type sort of platform. So I would say that Yeah, no, I think I take everything as a positive. Right? The positive is that you should really be embracing this type of result, and yeah, security teams need to get on board with that. Developers need to be part of making sure that their applications are secure in their cloud native architecture, because once they need something patched, they are going to need that developer to enact something in the pipeline to actually fix these problems half the time. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah,
agree 100%. Very interesting research. I love how you kind of pitted the two teams against each other to see the different perspectives. We as security people can't expect every developer to become a security expert. So we need to give them tools that are automated and easy. And that's one of the things that's powered Snyk's success so far. You're a developer-centric security, aren't you? The more automated, the more red light, green light, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very, 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 very true. And I think while everyone should be very, very security conscious, I think absolutely there are two different types of developers. There are developers that we would call security curious, people who are interested and would want to learn more. But ultimately, every developer needs to be a secure coder, a secure developer. And that doesn't necessarily mean going deep into development, but they do need to have across the board, an understanding of why they need to keep their dependencies up to date, why they should do input validation. They don't need to be deep in security, but they need to understand, they need to have good security considerations. So I think the responsibility point of view, people need to be responsible as developers for what they create and make sure they maintain good security hygiene. And I think there's a lot that we can rely on in tools. There's a lot we need to do though, from earlier, from threat modeling, from secure code reviews, from general understanding and training. But largely, we don't need every developer to be fully trained security experts, right? That's just not possible, and not something that everyone wants anyway. So why even try and pursue that? I think that Ian, the security champions, I think, is a really important thing where you almost like identify voluntarily those who want to go deeper, those who want to be advocates for security as engineers in an engineering team, and have the processes and the practices grow more organically. And I think that's a very strong way of actually getting that connection. I also think that in order to get this growth within the development organization, the empowerment of developers, they can't just take they can't just take the responsibility, etc., of this security. They need to be able to show there's care, show that they're capable of doing it, show that they know what they're doing. And gradually there's this movement of developers being more autonomous in this space. And it's not something that everyone can just have straight away, but it's something that people almost need to earn through learning, through that training, through that experience. So this is great to see. I think I absolutely agree that this is a interesting data and good to see this pull from developers there. Talking of care, one of the other areas, and I think this maybe goes from what you were saying earlier as well, Jack. The care or how people think about whether they're more concerned about moving to a cloud native space or less concerned moving into a cloud native environment. Either way, you can see a correlation between the answers here, and that developers and security teams, they're equally concerned or equally unconcerned about the security moving into these cloud native environments. So this is really good to see, right? In terms of developers do care.
Yeah, they need to have that awareness, right?
Yeah.
And the big takeaway in this slide, Simon, is the big bubble that says increased. So security concerns are increasing. And I think that's explained, as I mentioned earlier, the pace of software delivery is increasing and continues to increase. Survey after survey says next year will be even faster. We're aiming for weekly turnarounds or daily turnarounds. But the concern is caused because the security tooling is really not increasing as fast. There's too much security tools that are still not automated. Just like you said, Simon, the security guy shows up with a list of 20,000 vulnerabilities. That's still happening.
Absolutely. So we have just over 10 minutes left. This is a great conversation. We're running out of time though. So let's jump across to the overall report takeaways, which is largely a summary of some of the takeaways that we had on the major slides. That cloud adoption security is strong, and I expect it's going to just continue to get stronger over time. Misconfigurations and known vulnerabilities are the most common, both incidents and concerns. And I think there's a real correlation between the automation and the ability to actually have visibility into issues, but also fix those issues. And it's really good to see that the developers, while we're trying to shift into more of a developer-centric view of finding and fixing, we need to we need to recognize that developers, it's not something that maybe all developers don't want to do security, but developers want to own security, right? It's something that developers can take on. Maybe not all as experts, but that's fine. It's good to see these results that show that developers do want to own security. So that's the data that we have. In the remaining minutes, I'd happily move back over to Sharon and ask if there's some questions that we have from the folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much. This is a great conversation, and we've got some good stuff coming in here from our audience. Let's see. So, and I know some of these you may have touched on during the presentation, so forgive me if we're kind of circling back, but how can you avoid some of these main security issues from happening? I know you touched on tools and training, but it seems like the culture shift is hard. How do you convince people that these issues are serious and they really need to invest in these remediations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think so we talked about tools and training. I think finding things early is important. Using real production information to be able to almost like triage areas that we need that are higher priority to fix is important. A lot of that can also be done through things like threat modeling during design stages, right? Understanding and identifying where are the hotspots, where are the pieces that are the services that are absolutely critical, that are very close to the sensitive data, identifying all those areas of extremely high risk, and then understanding. And a lot of this is down to training and that recognition of what an actual attack is going to look like. We see so many misconfigurations in S3 buckets, in IAM roles, etc. They're all hitting the news every week. So understanding what a realistic attack is going to actually look like, and then having good communication between the teams that are security teams, understanding this and recognizing this with the engineering teams, but in a way that is effectively you're talking to an engineer. Engineers want to talk to other engineers. They don't want to talk to like super deep security people that they're not going to possibly understand or want to work around. So I think there's a huge amount of culture there, but adopting things early and understanding and fixing quickly for me is the way of stopping those from happening. I'd love to hear from Ian and Jack if there's anything else.
Yeah, I just say to keep it in that common workflow that everyone's comfortable with. A lot of the interactions I do is that the developer just wants a notification on Slack to say that something's wrong, so he can go in and fix it. You mentioned about S3 buckets being misconfigured. I think that's one of my top demos that I would do. But it is so common, unfortunately. It is in the press. It is going to be in the news. But the reality is that AWS do not misconfigure it on purpose. They say that this should be a private, but in context, and this is important, visibility gives context. Context that an S3 bucket is public, it may be a good thing. Like they may be serving off a website. But if it's public with documents from their customers in, that isn't a good thing. So having that common platform, Trend Micro Cloud One will look at specific rule sets of misconfigurations against not only your current architecture, but the current architecture you're about to build from an infrastructure as code point of view. and it's making sure that that's fed back in a format that's not that 500-page document. It is in a common language that's familiar with them. They can tick it off, or it can just disappear from a report. And you know, that security operations spreadsheet is going to be out of date the moment that they run something from a vulnerability point of view or something like that. So that ongoing tool needs to be adaptive, and you know, it's yeah, the security tools are being built like that these days for developers, right?
And I think I always say, like, if you give a developer two options, the right way and an alternative, they'll only choose the alternative if it's so much easier than the right way, right? And there are many pressures which make us choose the quick way. So it's you know, across vendors and others to make sure that the right way is the quick way, and a lot of that is in real good developer experience in tooling and in visibility. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Ian, I love what you said. Just show me the Slack message that says I need to fix this.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the kind of automation that developers like.
Or
you know,
pull
Sharon,
requests.
That's right. Yeah. Sharon, I think enterprises, the information is clear that security is a concern. The trick is, how do I solve that easily in an automated fashion? How do I avoid that security guy showing up with a list of 20,000 vulnerabilities that are not prioritized? You know, that's really where all the investment is going right now in the world of security. And I think that's what customers are interested in adopting, those kind of easy, automated. Dynatrace actually uses artificial intelligence. We combine the information from Snyk with our own information about what is the application connected to. Is it connected to the internet? Is it connected to a high-value database? And we take all those factors into account to then prioritize, here's what we think are the vulnerabilities that are the highest risk to you.
Right, right. So you can kind of anticipate what the blast radius would be if something happens, and then you can say, okay, well, we need to fix this one first because that has the most severe potential.
That's right.
Am I okay?
There's a really good follow-up question, actually, Sharon, in the chat. Reza asks what are the recommendations for integrating that container testing across the SDLC, which is
you read my mind. That was the one I was going to ask. Awesome.
I'd love to kind of take that one, because I think that's an important one. I think so another integration that Snyk has is with Docker. So for example, all the security testing on Docker Hub, in Docker Desktop, if you was to run Docker scan and the command line, that actually uses Snyk under the covers, and you can identify the vulnerabilities that exist in your containers and things like that there. I think it's you can then run that across the CLI in your Git repos, in your CI, and you can have tests that run. You can also only publish into registries, for example, if they meet a certain criteria, and have developers pull from there. So there's a number of ways in which you can kind of like add it throughout that. You can choose whether you want to gate tests there or whether you want to allow free flowing, depending on, I would say, your organization, the criticality of the services that you're running in there. I'm a big fan personally of having the security team put up guardrails whereby they say, look, here are a number of things that you should do. Here are a number of things which we're providing you with, and we're going to work together within this space. So we're not like saying you can only use these kind of things. We'll provide you these guardrails in which you can be creative and innovative in. So I think being just integrating container across this SDLC, having that testing throughout, having that actionability. So for example, if you was to use Snyk as an example, we'll provide you with recommended base images that can provide you with alternatives that say, if you move to this, you'll cut down your number of vulnerabilities in your base image or your parent image by whatever number. This is like the real actionable things that you can do in order to make a difference, as well as that continuous testing.
Excellent. Well, I'm sorry to cut in here, but we've got about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so I need to start wrapping up. Thank you all so much for this incredible discussion. Folks in the audience, thank you for your time. If you submitted a question either in the chat or Q&A and we didn't get to it, rest assured we're going to send all of these over to Jack, Ian, and Simon, and they will respond offline. Just a reminder that today's session has been recorded, so you can go back and watch it again if you missed anything or just want to watch the whole thing from the top. We also are at the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to draw our Amazon gift card winners here real quick. And our first winner today is James W. Congratulations, James. Second winner today is Ken R. Ken, congratulations. Danielle D. Congratulations to Danielle. And Zoe K. Congratulations to all our Amazon winners. And thank you again, Jack, Simon, and Ian, for your time today. Thank you for the audience. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. We hope to see you again soon. I'm Sharon Florentine, signing off.